Good evening, folks. Welcome to Here's the Deal with Luke and Shiloh. I'm Shiloh, and you all know my esteemed co-host, everybody's favorite barber rancher guy, Luke Simons. How are you, Luke? Brother
I
Luke?
I am good and getting gooder. How are you doing, Shiloh?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So last week we were off. We kind of took a little break to recharge the batteries, and we're here tonight to go. So if you will, uh, you want to start us off in prayer?
You bet.
All right. Sounds good.
Father God, we just come to you tonight and we thank you for your goodness and your mercy and your grace. And Lord, let us have mercy and grace on others as you give us grace, Lord. Lord, I pray tonight that you just touch our elected officials. Lord, let your spirit move on them, Lord. And Lord, I pray that you'll just give them wisdom as they make laws in a representative republic and use them, Lord. Lord, protect our families, protect our dear land that we do love. And Lord, I pray that you'll just work in our lives, help us to move the needle in your name. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you. So we have Ben Koppleman on tonight, North Dakota representative. Before we bring him on, I would just like to do a quick shout out here to our up and coming Dr. Frank event that is going to be next weekend already. Uh, Next weekend, Saturday, it starts right here in Williston. And then at 10 a.m., it's going to be in Williston. Saturday night at 6 p.m. All you folks down in Dickinson will be down there. And Sunday, the 12th, we will be in Lincoln, North Dakota, right outside of Bismarck. That'll be at 1 p.m. And don't worry, folks, we will be done before the Super Bowl, so you can come and hear what the man has to say and make your own assessments from there. And then Monday, we have him at the state capitol. We're going to have a press conference there with some people there, and we will finish our weekend off up in Minot. All you people up in Minot, 6 p.m. at the Living Lutheran Church up there in Minot. We will be up there with Dr. Frank. So looking forward to that. We hope to see everybody there.
Shiloh, tell me what Dr. Frank is all about in a nutshell.
Dr. Frank is going to talk about election integrity right here in North Dakota. We have sent him some information that we have as far as the 2020 election, and we are going to learn what we can do to stop the election fraud right here in our beautiful state in North Dakota. So that's what that's about.
Empowering you, the people, to get involved in your communities to keep an eye on election fraud. That's what it's all about. And you're going to love it. And he breaks it down so simple that anybody can do this. So
correct. All right. So enough with that. Without further ado, let's bring on State Representative Ben Koppleman. Maybe. There we go. Good evening, Ben. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Hello, good representative. This is one of the honorable representatives that I would say is very honorable. It is an honor to have you on, Representative Koppleman. And tell us where you're from again.
Well, if I tell you where I'm from, you're not going to like me because I'm from West Fargo.
You are.
I just hope that your listeners will not shut off the program before we get into the first subject, just because of where I'm from. So
that's right. And that's why I wanted to say that right away, because people aren't going to believe what they're going to hear tonight. Yes, we do have a few good conservatives in Fargo, West Fargo area. And Ben Koppleman is one of them. And it was an honor to serve with you, Ben. And he's still doing the good fight. We want to hear all about it. Ben, you have been in the news from one end of the state to the other. I think you made national news. Off the top of your head, how many times have you made national news this year with some of your bills?
Well, sometimes it's hard to track if it's regional or national news. You know, I don't know if you guys have ever done this on subjects you care about online, where you do like a Google alert and you put in some keywords. Well, I did it for my name, because during session you want to know what all the bad things people are saying about you. And so The first alert that people might be saying bad things about you is when it says Inforum, Grand Forks Herald, things along that line, because then they probably are not talking nice. If it says KFGO, you got to be even more suspect. But I don't know how many times it's been national news. I know some of the subjects that I've been working on certainly have interest nationwide in other state legislatures and just on issues as a whole.
Well,
Real
let's
good.
jump right into it. Before we start with that, let's talk about Fufang out there in Grand Forks a little bit first. It come out that the Grand Forks Air Force Base said that it would be a national security threat, and so it looks like that project is going to shut down. Do you have any takes on that as far as what's going on out there?
Well, as far as the news breaking of what the Air Force had to say about that, I probably didn't hear about it any sooner than you did. But I know leading up to that, they were pulling out all the stops with our congressional delegation and other connections to try to get somebody to take this seriously. And so many, including the Biden administration, just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said nothing to see here. And I really don't know why we're so willing to turn a blind eye to what China is up to. I mean, it's easy for the Biden administration to demonize the Russians in Ukraine, and at the same token, look the other way when China comes in the back door to right here to North Dakota, and who knows what they're up to. I mean, if they weren't thinking about spying, they certainly were thinking about it after everybody took notice. I can tell you that. So it's good to see that that's getting probably sidelined. And I think they are trying to find a new business that can go up near Grand Forks to try to provide the benefit that Grand Forks might have received, or at least thought they could receive from that, because we certainly don't want to cause economic harm, but we do have to look at national security first. And I think that's what's happened here. I don't really know how it's going to unfold, but I was excited to see the congressional delegation get that done.
Yeah.
So South Dakota passed a bill, I do believe, or they at least introduced it as to having any foreign country not purchase land here in their state. Now, have you heard any rumblings? Is there anything like that being talked about in North Dakota?
I don't know exactly which pieces of legislation are brought forward to deal with that. I had heard that there was 2 or 3 bills working their way through the process. Now, how they go about banning that ownership, I don't know. I'm not aware of any prohibition that would just stop us from just creating a law that says you can't do it. Normally, if we were going to pass such a law, I would be worried about constitutional rights being trampled on. If it was an individual, we're saying you can't own land here, that sort of thing. But in this case, the Chinese don't have constitutional rights in North Dakota. And I think in order to protect the constitutional rights of those people that do live here, we kind of have to put a stop to that. So how far that will go, I don't know. Would it be something where there's a review process where any sort of foreign transaction has to be reviewed? Maybe they'll put an acreage clause on there where if it's a very small amount of land, maybe it wouldn't be outright banned, but anything of a larger size would have to be approved. So I don't know which way they'll go, but I do believe there's 2-3 bills on that subject.
Well, Ben, did you just hear? I just heard on the radio today in the barbershop on the station I listened to, where Montana just had a spy balloon. They caught a spy balloon from a Chinese spy over the Montana Air Force Base. Did you hear about that? Just
No, I didn't. I kind of live in a cave when it's during the legislative session, unless I happen to read it in the next day's paper or catch it over on Fox News or somewhere else as I open my laptop before a floor session. I mean, I don't have that sort of thing up on my iPad when I'm working during the session, but it doesn't surprise me a bit. And the interesting thing is how blatant it was. I mean, it would have been a scandal in the Cold War if the Russians had a spy balloon caught over Montana. I mean, that would have been big news. And now it's just like, oh, it's just the Chinese. What do you expect? I mean, it's almost like we expect them to do that.
Right. Yeah. I was just taken aback and blown away. They said that they didn't shoot it down because they were afraid where it would land. which is peculiar in itself. But yeah, that's what the news made it sound like. I was like, stop everybody in the barbershop. And it's kind of interesting we'd be talking about this subject when I just heard that on the radio today. But again, there might be somebody out there that knows more about it. Please continue.
Well, one of the things that's always been a priority to me in the legislature has been protecting the Second Amendment. And a lot of that protection in the time I've been there has been trying to unwind restrictions on the Second Amendment that I don't believe are constitutional. And as the Supreme Court has heard various cases, it really started with the Heller case, the District of Columbia versus Heller back in 2008. And then a follow-up case to that, which was Chicago versus McDonald in 2012. And now we had the case that came out of New York, which was the NRA affiliate versus Bruin. And that case was kind of the next big case in that saga. And each time they have one of these cases, it really puts another building block into what does the Second Amendment mean? What does it mean to individually keep and bear arms? And how, obviously, if you're going to step up and join your militia, if the need was to arise, you'd have to have arms to do that. And it doesn't mean the National Guard. They made that clear in Heller. And they also made it clear that we're allowed to have whatever arms are, regularly available and produced, we can possess. I think that's the common sense bridge between you're not necessarily guaranteed to have a rocket launcher, but you can have a handgun. And so I think that's kind of where they drew a common sense line there. What's interesting about this recent Bruin case is this case really struck down a mid-level test that all the other federal courts had been using since Heller and McDonald to decide whether or not gun restrictions were constitutional. Now, the test that Heller and McDonald had created was pretty simple. Was there a historical precedent for this when they adopted the Second Amendment in 1791? Either was there a law prohibiting, let's just say, gun ownership at a bar or at the courthouse or something like that in 1791, or was it at least customary that everybody was like, well, it's common sense, you can't carry in a bar. And so all these different restrictions had to meet that test. Well, there was about 1,000 cases between 2008 and 2022 where that was put to the test in the federal courts. And the federal courts had adopted the second test, which was basically a compelling government interest test. So could the government justify that this place was such a sensitive place that they had to take your gun rights away? Well, in the Bruin decision, they struck down and basically just threw that second test away, threw it out and said, we never said there should be a second test in Heller and in McDonald. We clearly said there was a test, and by you putting a second test on, that's one test too many. So it really left, kind of knocked all the legs out from under the stool of this, these gun restrictions put on by, in this case, particularly New York, but the application of that decision applies even to North Dakota. And so now the only I guess you want to say lifeline that they left out of those cases for governments to rely on, another avenue, was what they call a sensitive place. And a sensitive place, if you follow the doctrine that's kind of come out of that, a sensitive place isn't just a place the government says, oh, we shouldn't have guns. What a sensitive place requires is that the government demonstrate that they actually believe it's a sensitive place. So an example would be the White House. They don't just say the White House is a sensitive place, but the White House is guarded by armed guards and metal detectors, much like the airports are. And so they've demonstrated that they believe the White House to be a sensitive place because they put proper security in there to provide anyone who visits the White House theoretically is safe. They don't have to worry about a bad guy having a firearm or something to attack them with, because there's just an extreme amount of security there. And so the only parallel that we have in North Dakota to that truly is probably the airports. But there are some other places that maybe would come close. Like I can think of the Cass County Courthouse, for example, where I'm from. They have an armed guard and metal detector at the door. You have to go through that. Staff passes through it, as far as I know. And so by having to pass through that, it's one of those things where you could say, well, maybe that could qualify. But if you look at all the sensitive places on the books we have, most of them can't meet that scrutiny. So one of the bills I introduced was trying to draw those lines and say, okay, courthouses probably can qualify. They may meet historical muster. They probably meet the sensitive places muster if you provide security, and thus they probably could be okay. Um, so I refer to that as my Bruin bill because of the Bruin case. It's a very relatively simple bill. It would remove the restriction on carrying in bars, and it also would remove this restriction on carrying in most government-owned and operated buildings. I purposely did not have the bill apply to schools or to churches, just because I was trying to keep it to be a narrower subject to discuss, although the same principle technically does apply in those places as well. So we'll see what the Energy and Natural Resources Committee does with that. Luke, you're familiar with the chairman, Todd Porter. I have no idea what opinion he's going to have on that, if he's going to try to shoot holes in it or if he's going to support it. I think one way or the other, we're going to try to get the word out and try to have everybody tell the legislature what they think about it and get the legislature to vote the right way, both on any amendments as well as the bill itself.
So if I can interject here, is there, so as a citizen, who do I email on that? How do I get a hold of the Gas and Natural Resource Committee to let your opinion be heard on this?
Well, at this point, I mean, you'd probably, if you wanted to email, your message would just be support, that bill. And I can give you bill numbers at some point if you'd like them. But you would say, hey, I'd like to see you support that bill. But I think it's key right now. They have these bills in a subcommittee, and the committee met for kind of to get organized this morning, but really didn't do any committee work yet. And so that committee work is going to happen starting next Thursday. And so then we'll see what the committee's appetite is for things. And once we know what direction that they're leaning toward, then we would want people to get involved and say either, don't go down that road, or, please go down that road, or whatever. Just depends on how friendly the committee chooses to be. And if you'd like, I can get you, as we go, if any of your listeners are interested, I can get you the bill numbers of these various bills. The bill I was just talking about that I refer to as the Bruin bill is, let's see here, that's House Bill 1483.
So basically, in a nutshell, this bill would clear up carrying a gun in a place that serves alcohol, not necessarily just a bar, but serving alcohol, things of that nature. Correct?
Well, actually, so the way that this works is right now you can carry in any place that even if they serve alcohol, as long as minors are allowed. So if you go to a bar that allows minors to eat there for lunch and stay till 8, 10 o'clock at night, whatever hours the minors are allowed, you're allowed to carry. If it's a restaurant that serves alcohol, you're allowed to carry. If it's a bar that doesn't allow anybody in under 21, you're not allowed to carry unless you're law enforcement or a few other exemptions. And so this would make it so it was just like how it is when the minors can come in. I mean, it really is a little silly in the sense that I can carry when the minors are around, but I can't when they're not. I don't think the minors have anything to do with, my ability to exercise the Second Amendment. So, and honestly, the bars are the toughest thing for them to justify. I mean, I understand the argument that, alcohol and guns don't mix, or, people do things, when they're drinking, judgments clouded, and maybe they do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. But the statistics and the stories besides what happens don't really support that fear. I mean, we don't have, in states that don't ban carrying in a bar, they don't have gunfights in bars. And when they do have people bringing guns into a bar, generally it's somebody that, number one, would not have paid attention to the pesky little infraction that is the penalty for carrying into a bar, because they're about to commit a crime that's much more serious. But number two, they have a mission, like the guy who attacked the nightclub in Florida, for example. That guy had a mission. He had people he was targeting. He came in with the intent to shoot the place up. Well, no infraction threat is going to stop that. And there's no historical precedent that I'm aware of that would back that up in North Dakota. And it certainly is not a sensitive place in the sense of what other sensitive places might be. And if you wanted it to be a sensitive place, you better start fortifying all the bars in North Dakota, which we know is not going to happen. And so
No.
now, if my bill passes, let's be clear, the establishment can still say, we don't allow guns in here. That's a private property right.
Sure.
But we're talking about what the government restricts.
Okay, so changing gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit. Recently in the news, there was a bill put forward about drag shows in front of minors. And I do believe you also are supporting a bill or bringing a bill forward about female sports. Do you care to comment on that?
Well, we recently and actually overwhelmingly approved a bill in the House that basically said, hey, if you're going to do some sort of a burlesque show or a drag show or something that might be sexually suggestive or explicit or might be on the edge of what the decency laws that we already had in the books were, that you can't do it in the presence of minors. And some of these drag shows were actually happening in places where minors might likely be. And I don't know of all the circumstances of where they were at, but I think I heard reports that they had been at like libraries and other places which are kind of in the public forum, not just bars on a Saturday night or in some performance hall or something like that. And we need to protect the innocence of our children. We should not expose them to adult concepts, regardless of if those concepts are appropriate for adults or not. So that was a pretty simple vote for me to make, at least, and I believe it was something like 80 some votes to a couple, like a dozen or something like that in the House. So pretty overwhelming. That's heading over to the Senate. On the female sports page, I guess we have two bills coming forward. I believe the one bill is 1249, and I believe the other bill is, I'll grab it for you here. The other bill is 1489. And those two bills, one deals with K-12, basically our regular schools, and the other one deals with higher ed, so your colleges. And it basically just kind of undergirds the concept that female sports are for females. And ever since 1971, when we had the Title IX Act of Congress come in, which essentially was trying to provide a platform and a place for women to compete, where they can compete against their relative equals, which is now where female sports that we have today originated. And that was never under threat until maybe the past 3 to 5 years. And all of a sudden, they wanted to redefine the terms gender and sex, which in my speech I give on this, they actually meant the same thing in the dictionary back when Title IX started. And basically, if you were born a woman, then that's how you competed. And there was never any argument on that. Now, there is a way where females can go up in competition to the male sports, but they have to go through some sign of scrutiny to make sure it's safe and that sort of thing. But there isn't an avenue for men to come play in female sports. And so because terminology seems to find its way to becoming redefined, we had to really put in a couple bills that said, no, we still mean that women are women and they play in women's sports without men. And that's what the bills do. The Biden administration had tried to say that you should be able to play based on your gender identity, based on who you declare you are that day or that week or that year. And we just felt that was going to take a lot of opportunities away for women. And I introduced a similar bill 2 years ago. The governor vetoed it. We fell a couple votes, 3 votes, I think, short in the Senate of overriding him. And I'm confident we have the votes this year. This year, we're also bringing the higher ed one. And I think they're going to pass on similar vote totals. They'll probably hit the floor of the House about mid next week.
So why did the governor veto that last go around, if you can refresh the viewing audience?
Well, the excuse in the veto memo was that they didn't feel that there was transgender individuals choosing to try, born male wanting to compete as females, that there was any in the state. and that they thought the high school athletic program, the High School Activities Association, had a policy that was just fine and it was working. Interestingly enough, that policy 2 years ago would have allowed Kobe Bryant at age 16 to take hormone blocking medication for 1 year and then go compete with the girls. I mean, it was just ludicrous. And now they recently this fall, so probably they would say because of no athletes again, I'm not sure, but they changed the policy. And so they no longer allow that. But now what they'll allow if you find a doctor that will claim you do not have a competitive advantage against women, then a biological male can play in female sports. So now we're relying on just if you can find one doctor to agree with that, then that's how you can apply to do it. I believe their board can veto that or whatever, but it's just a silly concept, very subjective. And I think I could find a doctor to say that we all have blue skin. I mean, you can get a doctor to say anything if you only need one. It's kind of like a statistic. You can find a statistic that says just about anything. So it's important that we pass those bills. We are really shooting to have veto-proof majorities. If stuff goes well, hopefully we'll have close to 75% in each chamber. We only need 66 to override the governor.
Right. Cool. And how was it perceived how did it go in committee?
Well, the committee, it came out of the committee with, there was a couple absent members, and it came out of the committee with like a 9-3 do pass recommendation, I believe. We're sending it back to committee to get one section adjusted a little bit, and then we're going to bring it out of committee again. I think it'll probably come out 11-3 this time around. So we'll get our other votes that we need out of the committee. So with 11-3 do pass recommendation, my hope is that we'll get somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 people to vote for it. Most likely they'll only be Republicans. I hope we have Democrats joining us. I mean, this seems common sense enough, but if it's like last session, it'll pretty much be, we'll have most of the Republicans and virtually no Democrats. But
right. Yeah, you'll have a few Republicans that probably won't jump on the board. Shannon Roars-Jones or someone like that, probably. But other than that, I would think
she's a Republican.
Well,
I don't give up hope on anyone. I sure hope Representative Roars-Jones, as well as others that did not vote with us last time, vote with us this time. I know she had some concerns last time about a facilities restriction that we had. This bill, as it comes to the floor, will not have that facilities restriction. So I'm hoping that'll remove barriers for some. There are some legislators out there that'll say that they have a certain barrier, and then they'll find a new barrier as soon as you remove the first barrier. And I hope that's not the case, but I hope they'll have to vote their conscience. Yeah.
Well, good deal. I was happy two things. I was happy that you brought that bill forward, and two, I was glad that you did it because you have a way with words and kind of a no nonsense. Folks, if you want to see your government at work, get a hold of Ben Koppleman, even though he's from West Fargo, and see when he's in committee, it is a lot of fun to watch. He is a very interesting wealth of knowledge to be there. And I actually don't like opposing you, Ben, because of that. It's kind of fun. Even when we disagree on things, it's just like, I don't want to discuss Ben because that's just how that works.
Well, is that because he's right?
You're just too worried about converting to my side after we have our discussion. I think that's the problem.
I think it's because he knows you're right, Ben.
Ben, the thing is I love it when I'm wrong because then I can be right. And sometimes it takes me a while to do that, but it takes me, like there was things that I disagree with your dad on, a few things. Kim Koppleman was a force in the state legislature for years. He was my chairman. But you know what? After a couple of years of being there, I got it. I totally seen what he was up to, and I seen the beauty of it. And that's the cool thing about the legislature. If you're agreeable, you can really learn a lot of things. Anyways, Ben, I know you got more. What else do you got for us?
Well, I seem to be probably have my face on all the dartboards at City Hall in Fargo right now. I'm bringing back another a bill that's sort of the souped up on steroids version of a bill I had last session, which is basically trying to stop efforts that Fargo has on local gun control.
Before Ben, I'm just going to interrupt you real quick. Let's do this, Shiloh. Let's get that bill number and let's put it up on the screen so that everybody knows exactly which bill he's talking about.
This is 1340.
1340. This is a very, very important.
HB
1340. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the name
continue.
of it?
Well, in the House, in the North Dakota, there is no names on bills.
Okay.
But you could call it, what do you want to call it?
HB 1340.
Well, I think we call it the tell Fargo to knock it off bill, but you can call it what you want. But anybody that wants to see these bills we're talking about, you can go to ndlegis, that's legis.gov. And in the depending on if you're on a mobile device or not, I believe it's in the top right corner. It may show up in the middle of the page, but it just gives you an opportunity to just type in 1340, and then you'll have that bill number if you want to see what this is all about, or if you just want to copy and paste that bill number to your email and send it to your legislator, and you can find your legislator on that page as well by entering your address and that sort of thing. But anyway, so HB 1340 is the hopped up on steroids version of a bill we had last session, which it's actually ndlegis.gov. If I said .com, I apologize. But anyhow, so when last session, I brought this bill, which basically was a Fargo knock it off bill. They were trying to enforce an ordinance that they had passed that stopped gun dealers from officing out of their house. And what was so ironic about it is the people in Fargo are a lot of them are pretty big pro gun control, universal background check type of thing. And yet the very people they were putting out of business were the people that do background checks on every single transaction. So it was just so ironic, and it showed how they didn't really understand what they were doing. But North Dakota, since 1983, has had a restriction that says no city or county, or including home rule, may pass an ordinance basically on local gun control. It gives a list of like possess, transfer, sell, all those sort of things of guns and ammunition. It says they can't do it. So the simple term is locals don't even try to do gun control. We said you can't do it. And Fargo passed an ordinance back in 2001 that had this restriction in it, but nobody really knew about it because they didn't enforce it till like 2017. And then in 2017, apparently they told the ATF that they had this ordinance. And so then when everybody tried to renew their license, they kept getting denied.
Ben, can I just...
Yep.
The ordinance. What's the ordinance exactly?
The ordinance was a zoning ordinance that said you could not be a firearms dealer and have your office basically in your house. So anything that was in residential area, you could not do gun transfers. You couldn't do anything like that. And our state law said no city can have an ordinance that restricts the transfer of firearms, amongst other things. And so that's where the beef was. And I didn't bring the bill to the legislature until after all the communication between me and the city had broken down. We couldn't work it out outside of legislation. The attorney general decided to kind of punt on the issue and not give a ruling. And so I needed legislation. Well, anyway, we passed this legislation last session. The first thing Fargo does is take us to court. They take us to court, and they argue that they should, because of the Constitution of the North Dakota, which encourages local control, they said, the state legislature can't limit what we want to do because of local control. And the judge didn't even, best I can tell, didn't even respond to their point of view. But instead, the judge went kind of pulled a John Roberts and created a method that this judge thought that they could have this little niche local gun control. So what we did this time is we went back into the law, and this time, instead of dealing it with them in the gun chapter, I dealt with them in the zoning chapter, and I dealt with them in the home rule charter chapter, and everywhere that I could think of to tie them up. And oh, by the way, there's language in there that says this cannot be construed to essentially allow local gun control, which undid or will undo what the lawsuit was. And so we've got this, we've had it through committee. It's waiting on possibly a little amendment for clarification, but it's basically, I think, going to see the full House floor in its current form. And I would hope that we'll get 75 or 80 votes in favor of this and send it off to the Senate. So that's the Fargo. We really, really mean it, Bill. Stop messing with us. But I have no doubt that they'll probably try to sue us again. And so then go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish your comment, because
I was going to pivot to another reason I'm on the dartboard in Fargo, but if you have a question on that one, maybe we'll do that.
No, I don't have a question on that bill. I was going to bring up the another bill here that we were talking about. It's the corporate farming bill, but go ahead, finish your.
Well, let me pivot to this one, and then maybe we can hit corporate farming.
Sure.
Have you guys ever heard of ranked choice voting?
Yes.
Okay, for those out in the audience, you might remember on election day we couldn't figure out who Alaska's senator was going to be.
Right.
And election night, Lisa Murkowski, who's the not so Republican senator from Alaska, was losing to another Republican. And they don't have a primary in Alaska, so there's like 3 or 4 Republicans running, 2 or 3 Democrats running, an independent, whatever. And Murkowski's in second place, but nobody got 50%. So behind the scenes, what happened, and what we found out later the next day, I believe it was that magically Murkowski won. We were like, what the heck happened? And what they did was, with this ranked choice voting, they have you write down who your second choice is. Yep. And so if your candidate ends up being on the bottom and ends up sort of getting the least number of votes, then they'll say, well, we'll just pretend like you voted for your second place guy. And then they'll count your vote in that person's, and so on. And they'll go round after round. Who's your third choice? Who's your fourth choice? Right. And eventually somebody gets 50%. And so Lisa Murkowski won, probably because the 3 Democrats at the bottom who got the least number of votes preferred Murkowski over her Republican, more conservative challenger. So in a nutshell, that's ranked choice voting, where a winner does not win.
So do you know how many states? I'm sorry, Ben.
No,
do you
go
know
ahead.
How many states use that? Because there's that when that happened in Alaska, I forget, I think it was Baggio, or however you say his last name, was talking about that, was speaking about ranked choice voting, and there's a few other states that use that as well, and of course it's Democratic states, but
I'm not sure how many states use it. I know Alaska uses it. I wouldn't be surprised if California uses it in some fashion, but I don't know if they do it at state or local or both. All I know is it's a very un-American, very it doesn't belong in a democratic republic.
Yep.
And so when we have a system of government where we're a republic that allows a democratic process at election time, one man, one vote should mean one man, one vote, not one man, but let me tell you what to switch my vote to if my candidate doesn't win. And so that's what ranked choice voting is. Well, we have this in North Dakota. Best of my knowledge, we do not have ranked choice voting anywhere yet. However, the city of Fargo, and the reason why I'm in their crosshairs again, they actually considered ranked choice voting a few years ago for their city elections, but instead ended up becoming the first city in the country to do approval voting. Now, this voting method is even worse yet. This voting, at least in ranked choice voting, if somebody wins and gets 50% of the first ballot, it's more like what we usually do. In approval voting, it doesn't work that way. So imagine the 3 of us are running for mayor, and mayor in North Dakota is not a partisan race. And so, Shiloh, your favorite color is red, and Luke, your favorite color is blue. And my favorite color is, well, what do you want my favorite color to be? Because I don't have principles. I'm just whatever. I'm kind of like vanilla, right? And so you go to the polling place, and the voter says, well, I'm definitely not going to vote for Luke because I don't like the color blue. But I can vote for as many people as I want. So I'm going to vote for Shiloh as my first choice and Ben as my second choice in case Shiloh doesn't win. And then if another voter does the opposite and votes for Luke and I, and let's just say there was only 2 people that came to the poll, who wins? I've got 2 votes for being vanilla, and you each got 1 vote because you guys were too principled. So what it does is it allows the non-principled person to win, which generally either favors non-principled or it favors incumbents. And so it's a terrible voting system. And so
Yep.
both that and the ranked choice voting like Alaska has would be banned in North Dakota if my bill passes. And that's why
Cool.
Fargo doesn't like me.
Cool.
Because they're
Well,
totally set that up in their favor is what they're
Well,
doing.
that's what I would think. And of course, the current politicians are like, what's wrong with this? We used it in the last election and we won. What's the problem? You know, I mean, it's like, of course they don't mind, right? But you were talking about the corporate farming bill.
yes, let's switch gears here a little bit. It's HB 1423, correct?
That does sound right. I don't have that one pulled up at the moment, but I can tell you what it does.
Okay.
This is the second time in my legislative tenure where we've had an attempt to remove at least part of our corporate farming prohibition. The last time we passed it out of the legislature, and believe it or not, the Farmers Union came and referred it at the ballot, and the people overturned it, but on a very one-sided information campaign. Now, this current bill, what the purpose of it is to try to provide a lifeline to our dairy industry, our poultry industry, both turkeys and chickens, are in some facets of our beef industry, and other animal agriculture, hogs. Now, beef has a pretty good footprint in North Dakota, but it probably could be stronger yet. And the other areas are really dwindling. Now, you look at our neighbors. Minnesota's got a lot of poultry. Wisconsin's got tremendous amount of dairies. South Dakota's beating us in both of those categories, as well as hogs. And so the reason they're doing it is because they can get outside investment. And so, people think of our oil industry, and all of you in the West can appreciate this. If we had the corporate farming law, but instead it was the corporate oil field law, and Halliburton couldn't come in, and Continental couldn't come in, and all these other, big oil companies could not come invest in North Dakota. There would be no Harold Hamm. There would be none of these people coming to North Dakota and adopting it as their second home. Would the oil industry have gotten off the ground if just a few ranchers had to fund it, with their own family money? I don't think so. And so by allowing corporate investment, those that own the mineral rights, that own the land, I mean, there's been challenges, but they've been done very well by allowing the corporate investment. Now put that into animal agriculture. And you say, well, it's not working that well. It's just the amount of money that the families are willing to invest in. Some of them may not want to take a chance on it because it's been a dwindling industry in North Dakota for so long. But if you can have that same sort of corporate investment in animal agriculture that you had in oil exploration and oil production, that we should dominate this region in that. And we probably could in not that many years if we simply would open up the playing field. So I believe that's what the bill would do. Farmers Union is already threatening to refer it at the ballot if we pass it again. And I guess we can't run scared of that. We got to do what's right and try to put a better message than they do out to the people. But it's really interesting to me that the Farmers Union claims to be about farmers, but that would be like being about ranchers if you couldn't invest in their oil patch. And so I think they're actually counter what's good for farmers. And they've lost touch with reality and what it would take today to improve that sector of the industry. I think they've pretty much just surrendered that sector of the industry. So hopefully people will support that effort.
I have an 87-year-old grandfather now that would agree with you about the Farmers Union. He always tells me, I don't know why you do business there because they just use your money against you. So he's very much not for the Farmers Union anymore. It's not like it was when it got started.
Well, and I think that's why we have the Farm Bureau now too, because I think it's an alternative to the Farmers Union. At one time, maybe the Farmers Union did serve North Dakota well, like maybe labor unions serve their purpose in various sectors of the market. But once they become, like with labor unions, once they became self-serving and self-preserving, then the entity was more important than the worker. And at that point, they broke down. And I kind of feel like that's what's happening with Farmers Union here in North Dakota.
Yep. I didn't even eat when I was in the legislature. I didn't even eat their free pancakes they would have, the Farmers Union, because they were so blue and they were so pro-union and so anti-Republican. But like you said, the Farm Bureau, a little shout out to the Farm Bureau. What a conservative group. I don't know that I've disagreed with them on really anything. And like you said, Ben, just to back up a little bit, some people may not know, you can incorporate anything. I can incorporate my barbershop. If the three of us wanted to start a chain of barbershops, we would incorporate. We would take Ben's money, and we would. I mean, man, we could just be wealthy all over the place. And the thing is you're incorporated then. It is an entity unto its own. But farming, for some reason, farming and ranching, in North Dakota, we said you can't incorporate. Well, what if your uncle wants to invest? What if your uncle in law wanted to invest in your farm?
Well, and what we've done is we've tinkered and tailored the law to account for those family relationships. We have allowed those family farms to incorporate and such, but even every session we find that it's not working that well anymore. So if you go back historically, we have a state bank, we have a state mill, we have a state elevator, and if you look at the history of why we have that, it's because the citizens of North Dakota did not want to be ran by Minneapolis. And back in the early days of the state, we didn't have a lot of our own cash money to invest and spend. And so they said, here's how we're going to get rid of the influence from Minneapolis. So regardless how we feel about that stuff today, there was kind of a purpose it served. And I think there probably was a time where the anti-corporate farming they were worried about the Minneapolis money coming in and taking over all the land and that sort of thing. But times aren't like that anymore. And so what we've seen in the legislature is they're constantly having to come back and say, oh, well, now you can be, without violating the corporate farming law, now you can be like a second cousin, and it can be, and then they keep branching out. But as the family trees get longer and now we're fourth, fifth, sixth generation, they're going to have to keep tinkering with the law until at some point it just doesn't even make sense anymore. And so, the generational thing will continue to break down that law just because of how families grow. So I hope we can pass that bill, and I believe our information and our strategy at the ballot box will be much better this time.
All right, let's change gears a little bit again, and let's talk about a need for speed.
I kind of feel like I'm on the Jeopardy show, where it's like maybe I should start answering with what is a need for speed or something like that. Or maybe we're in a game of Trivial Pursuit where we just change topics on a whim. But for those of you that like to go fast, I've got something for you. For those that don't like to go fast, please move over to the right lane. We have a bill that would change the interstate speed limit to 80 miles an hour, both on Interstate 94 and Interstate 29. It's not an absolute change, where there will likely be a few places that remain 75. Out in the west, it would be your scenic overlook around Medora area, and maybe for a few miles either direction. Out east, there's a couple of railroad overpasses that are a little sketchy with how the angle of the grade and such are. So there might be a handful of places that stay at the 75 mile an hour speed limit. They may someday choose to govern the speed around a couple of towns like Valley City or Jamestown for a short section. But generally speaking, the idea is to go to 80 miles an hour. And all of our contiguous states, both south and west of us, have 80 miles an hour. South Dakota does, Montana does, Wyoming does, and I think Wyoming might even be testing 85 out in some places. That's what they're all doing. And we're the only state around that is kind of a prairie state that doesn't have it. Now, Minnesota doesn't have it, but their state's much different, and their government is much different. And I don't think we should want to mimic many of the things that they do there. But we've been trying this for several sessions, trying different ways to do it. This session, I believe, is going to be the session. We had very little resistance from the Department of Transportation, because they've put up a lot of cable barriers between in the center ditch and other things to make the road safer. We've given them some latitude on some of the places to implement it, so I think they're good there. And this bill does not have a fiscal note, so they are going to need to replace these speed limit signs in the next 3 years probably anyway, because most of them are aging out and don't have reflectability anymore. for night driving. And so they're just simply going to change the numbers out when they put in a new sign. So they haven't listed an individual cost for implementing this. So I really believe this is the time. I think we'll get a very solid vote out of committee, maybe 11, 12, 13, 14 in favor. And then we'll pass it on the floor, I believe, and then we'll send it over to the Senate. And we have a new Senate this year. That is very exciting, and in no small thanks to some of the individuals that you sent from the West. And so, I believe you replaced the senator with a more conservative senator, and there's a new district out west, out near Williston, that I believe contributed a conservative senator. And so we're pretty excited that the Senate. We used to say the Senate's where all good bills went to die. And now I believe the Senate is really giving us a run for our money on who's going to be judged to be more conservative at the end of the session. And so that's kind of a challenge that I'm willing to take to try to say my house is still better. But we'll see, because they're very good this year, and I believe that they'll pass a lot of the good policy that we have.
Cool. We do have a question here. It says, what is the truck speed limit in this bill?
Interestingly enough, in North Dakota, at least in my recollection, we've never had a truck speed on the interstate. Some states have 65 for trucks, or possibly 70 for trucks. But what's interesting is loaded trucks, at least in my experience, and I drive probably 40,000+ miles a year, maybe close to 50,000 miles a year around the state. And in my experience, most trucks are governed by their operator at 65 to 70 miles an hour. And so those trucks, now it's really a bear when they decide to pass each other, because it's about a 4-mile ordeal. But generally they're respectful, and they'll move over and stay in the right lane when they can. And I believe they're going to continue to do that. DOT was asked about the truck speed limit, but I believe their experience is similar to my experience, in the sense that there isn't a desire for trucks to drive faster than 75. And most of them aren't even doing 75 now. So there's not really a need to have a separate truck speed. And the states that really push for those separate truck speeds generally are further out east, where the traffic's a lot denser than it is here. We just did not have dense traffic outside of a few miles around Fargo and maybe a few miles around Bismarck. And so, I don't believe that we're going to pursue a truck speed, but I do believe the prevailing truck speed on the road is going to be between 65 and 70 going forward as well.
Cool.
And you have the support of the House chairman of transport.
I do. Dan Ruby supports it. He supported it in the past couple sessions with me. But I've also got a little ace up my sleeve that I serve on the transportation committee now as my B committee this session. So right or wrong, I am able to twist a few arms on the committee to try to help get a better vote. So I'm really confident in the committee vote. I'm fairly confident in the House vote, and I'm excited to see what the Senate can do this time around.
Well, we recall, if I can jog our memories back to the House floor debate last time around, if my memory serves me correctly, that was actually fairly close, actually. And I'll never forget this, but there was an older gentleman that I don't know if he was reelected or not, but he got up and said, "I like the speed limit 75. I mean, everyone goes 80 anyways." He goes, "Well, I guess I went a little over that on the way here, actually." I always do.
And then he probably voted no, right?
He did. He did vote no. He stood in opposition of the bill. And I just was like, it's like people know that everyone's going 80, but then they don't want to change the speed limit.
Well, there's actually national highway studies and kind of and DOT would tell you this as well. There's a kind of a philosophy, and it's kind of the rule of 85 or 85%, where if 85% of the traffic is driving higher than the speed limit, if the prevailing speed is higher than the speed limit of 85% of the people, you should raise the speed limit, because where traffic is the most dangerous is where you have speed differentials. And so if you have a bunch of people driving really slow and one guy driving fast, obviously you want to slow down the guy that's driving way too fast. But if you have everybody driving fast and maybe a couple people driving slower because they're trying to obey the limit, it's better to raise the limit so everybody's maintaining a more consistent speed. And so that's the philosophy here. Obviously, on a divided lane highway where you have 2 lanes going each direction, slower traffic can move over as opposed to on a 2-lane highway. But the fast lane really should be, the speed limit should be similar to the prevailing speed. And so, like I said, the opposition from any of the administration, from the highway patrol or they all came in neutral. And it was very constructive what they had to say. And I was encouraged by that because it hasn't always been that way.
Yeah. And I mean, just the reality of it. I mean, I set my cruise control in older vehicles at 79 miles to an hour, and I'm getting past like I'm standing still. I pass a lot of Dodges, I guess, Dodge pickups. I mean, I just right by them.
Well, he thinks he's got one. He thinks he's got one up on me, but I'd pass him in my F-350 all day long, so it doesn't really matter.
Oh no! I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about somebody else.
Yeah, he's talking about me, but
I used to drive a Dodge. I thought he was trying to get me, but
yeah, my Dodge is so fast it leaves flames in its tire tracks. So,
at one time I tried to consider increasing the speed on the other divided highways as well, like sections of 83, Highway 2, some of that. And maybe we'll get there someday. I mean, I think some of the stretches of road could certainly support it, but it just was too big of an ask. So we're just focusing on interstates on this bill.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine from Germany, he comes here and he is always like, man, if you guys would drive on the Autobahn, he said, it is, we don't have near the road. Your interstates are amazing. He said, and there is no speed limits there. Literally, you'll get past at 230 miles an hour. And they just become very good drivers. You just have to be. You have to be a good driver because somebody can pass you in a Porsche or something that would be crazy.
Or a Dodge.
And if you're caught texting and driving over there, I think they cut off your left hand. No, wait, maybe that's something else. But no, they are pretty strict about driving offenses. I mean, you get if you got a couple of tickets for something, I mean, that would really mean something there. It would be a lot bigger deal here. But
any other upcoming news that we need? Well, there is a tremendous amount of gun bills that you haven't even touched on, Ben. And I know that you're pretty much the rock star with guns right now. What's going on? What's going on with gun bills?
A couple other gun bills that are going through. Actually, these ones are also my gun bills. I have one that would allow anybody who's allowed to carry, meaning you're not prohibited from carrying.
What's the bill number?
This bill number, give me a second, I will find it here. The one I'm referring to is a capital carry bill, which would allow any law-abiding citizen to carry concealed in the Capitol. That is, let's see here. That's 1341. And that's all the bill does. Basically says you can carry in the Capitol. All of our surrounding states, believe it or not, including Minnesota, allow you to carry in their Capitol. And Minnesota's allowed it for I know it's more than 10 years. It might be pushing 20 years now.
Yeah.
And there's no incident. There wasn't an incident during George Floyd riots. There wasn't an incident during any of that sort of stuff. And so it only makes sense that we should be able to carry here. I don't know if we think that there's something in the water that makes us a little crazier here or why we can't carry in our Capitol. But that's something that we're working on. We also have let me find another one here that we've got. Let's see. We've got, here's a little bit different. This isn't exactly a gun bill, but it might be of interest. This is a bill that it's 1337. And what this bill says, if you followed, kind of gun bills and such, you know that the school districts have really fought any lessening of restrictions on carrying by law-abiding citizens on their facilities. And so my attitude has always been, you remember, go by safe places argument. Well, or sensitive places argument. I mean, is that if you're not going to let people carry and protect themselves, then you darn better provide a way to protect them where they don't need to protect themselves. And I'm sorry, but schools are not fortresses. They're not well fortified. Only the good guys choose to not carry at schools if that's the way things work. And so this bill would require that schools use a percentage of the money that we send them from the state on school security. It's kind of the put your money where your mouth is type thing. You say you want to protect kids and that safety is important to you, prove it. And so that's that bill. Let's see what else we got here. We've got, I believe it's 1339. This bill is, you're familiar with the constitutional carry, which we brought in, and I believe it was 2017.
It was.
The last couple of sessions, we've made some improvements. Last session, I was able to get a couple improvements on it. One of them was that it used to be that you had to be a resident in North Dakota for a year to execute constitutional carry. I tried to remove that restriction last year. I got it down to 30 days. And this year I'm trying to remove it entirely. There are 25 states that have constitutional carry, or what some call permitless carry. And in all the other 24 states, North Dakotans can go there and carry with their driver's license. Some states don't even require ID, but for sure with your driver's license, you could carry if you're allowed to carry here. If all those other 24 states come and visit here, sorry, you can't carry here because we only carry about a resident. We don't allow residents to do it. So this bill would allow it so that we go into parity with these other states. After all, the Second Amendment is a U.S. constitutional right. It's an interstate right. And so we shouldn't restrict our friends who are also Second Amendment lovers from carrying in our state. And so that would be House Bill 1339. There's another bill that I don't know that I have a bill number on because it's not mine. That's a gun bill that I did co-sponsor, but I'm kind of lukewarm on. It was trying to provide another mechanism for school security by allowing veterans that were honorably discharged to be able to carry in schools and other government buildings if they had a Class 1 concealed weapons license. The reason why I'm not super high on it is I'm generally not high on the idea of creating different classes of people that can carry and say, my gun rights are more important than your gun rights.
Right.
And just because somebody is a veteran, I mean, certainly they deserve our respect for protecting us and serving in our military, but not all veterans served in combat. I mean, not all of them they might have been a medic, or they might have been a JAG officer, or they might have been, some other administrative role. They're not all experts in handguns or that sort of thing. And I would argue that there are plenty of lay people that maybe just have a concealed weapons license that aren't, ex-military people that would be as good or better to provide that role. So I'd much rather see, if we're going to do the Class 1 concealed weapons license as the measurement, if we think that's what the level should be, then we should let all concealed weapons license holders that have the Class 1 carry in those buildings. And then I'd be much more excited about the bill. So I believe Representative Twite is the prime sponsor of that one. Again, I agreed to co-sponsor it because I really want to promote people pushing Second Amendment bills. I think that's what we should do, but I'm just not. I don't think the bill's quite in the right shape. Sure. There was another one introduced that I co-sponsored by a young representative, Matt Heilman from Bismarck, who took Rick Becker's seat in the legislature. And he introduced one. He's a college student, and he introduced one to carry on college campuses. And so I don't know how much chance that has of passing. I think it's got a fairly difficult road to hoe, but it is a good idea, and it is reasonable. I just don't think, I don't know if we have the guts to do that one this session. But that's another good bill to watch. We had one dealing with knives that would basically take all knives and swords and things off of all sharp objects, if you want to think of them that way, off of the dangerous weapons list. And the theory was that so many of them are used in as a tool of a trade that, whether you're a chef or whether you're a gardener or whether you're any number of things, a contractor, you might have long blades or knives that would qualify as dangerous weapons. Just take them all out and not have them be listed as dangerous weapons is what that bill said. The locals, I think, got pretty excited about that. I think they did not like the fact that those were taken out of dangerous weapons. And furthermore, that bill contained a prohibition, much like the one I mentioned for firearms with Fargo. Well, this had a prohibition against any political subdivision putting in an ordinance on knives. So we'll see where that goes. That was Representative Claire Corey from Grand Forks that introduced that. I did co-sponsor that as well. So just a few other kind of weapons bills to think about.
That bill in last legislative session, I brought that bill to play, and we had a surprising amount of law enforcement that was against that. So you can conceal carry a gun without a permit, but yet you have to have, just to back up, for our viewers, but yet you have to have a concealed weapons permit to have a knife that's over 6 inches.
Actually, Luke, I'm not sure you're correct on that.
Okay.
Because the constitutional carry, remember, has the same rights basically as a Class 2 concealed weapons license. Okay. Only you don't have to go get the test. You don't have to renew a permit. You just have that right with your driver's license. And what a concealed weapons license, it's not a concealed gun license. It's a concealed weapons license. So if I want to conceal a pair of nunchucks or a machete or a slingshot, if you want to have a little fun, we can talk about what that is. I can conceal that with using constitutional carry or with my concealed weapons license. What the knife bill was really targeting was all the restricted places where you couldn't have these weapons. So you couldn't carry a knife into the city hall or to the sports arena that you visit for your whatever sort of events goes on there, the civic center, things like that. And they thought that should be taken out. And you remember a lot of the logic that was behind that went beyond what I've talked about. But that's really what the bill would have done. It really would have opened up a lot of those places. Now, if I'm able to get my Bruin bill passed, that would also apply to knives, the same as it would to firearms. So same thing as if my capital carry passes. If you'd rather carry a knife instead of a gun because you're not trained with a gun, I mean, by all means, you should carry a weapon that you're comfortable with and that you're not going to hurt anybody else that doesn't deserve hurting. I mean, that you're not, where you're not protecting yourself. And so all those weapons, anywhere that you can carry a firearm, you can carry those other weapons currently.
Cool. Well, guys, time flies when we're having fun. I guess with that, if you have any
there's
closing...
one more bill, if I could talk about one more before we go.
Sure.
And this one is sort of gun related, but it talks about credit card purchases. And I don't know if you're familiar with what came out last year, but after the Bruin decision came out that I referred to earlier, California Attorney General and New York Attorney General got together and wrote a letter to Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. And what they said is that we want you to create a new credit card code, and anybody that's a gun seller, we want you to assign them this special code so that we can track how much volume an individual purchase has at let's say a gun dealer. But keep in mind, this could be Shields or whomever that sells guns. And we want it to have a separate code so that we can use that information to hopefully predict whether there's like illegal arms trafficking or somebody that's planning a mass shooting or whatever. That was their logic. Well, then like 23 members of Congress sign a letter to put more pressure on Visa, MasterCard, and American Express after they don't initially cave. Well, first one to cave, I believe, was either Visa or MasterCard. Then the other one followed shortly thereafter, and eventually American Express. Well, 24 attorney generals sent them a letter as well and said, what the heck are you doing? We think this is a violation of our rights. Don't do it. Well, then the international organization that has kind of this uniform credit card policy kind of standards, they decide to adopt this code. And Visa, MasterCard, and Discover, even though they're not forced to do what that organization does, they're like, oh, well, we're going to use best practices. We're going to start doing this. So now the CEO of Visa recently admitted that this code is not going to achieve what these people wanted to achieve in specifics. But you and I both know that it will aggregate data about where guns are being sold. And he even said, though, and he admitted that, we're going to follow best practices, but we'll ultimately follow the law. Well, to me, that's like putting a ball on a tee and handing me a driver and saying, swing as hard as you can. Because, I'm going to say, okay, let's put a law in place and say you cannot track people's gun purchases through their credit card. And
Right.
so that's a bill that we recently had a hearing on in the Industry, Business, and Labor Committee. I'll give you the bill number here on that. That was bill number 1487. And so House Bill 1487 had a hearing. We're going to do some amending to make sure we word it correctly to not harm our local banks and try to tie them up into this credit card situation. But it's a very important bill because we're considering it. I believe West Virginia's considering it. Florida's considering it. And I think I heard maybe one of the Carolinas is considering it. But really, we're on the forefront of this, and we can help start that movement that'll push back against these credit card companies infringing on our Second Amendment rights. So I appreciate the time, guys, today. Is there any other
Hey,
bills you'd
thank
like to
you.
cover?
Oh,
We
no,
could go on and on and on, but
we could. Thank you, Ben.
it's
You
just
are
been-
people. If you think this is a lot, be in the legislature sometime. Your dad, Kim Koppleman, has always said being in the legislature is like taking a sip of water out of a fire hose, and it is true. And Ben, you were going over things so fast that I know that you could have went on a half hour, 45 minutes on just one of those subjects. Thank you so much for taking time out of
Yep.
your busy schedule. I know you're reading all night long during session, and you are in session. Thank you so much, Ben. And also
Yep,
thank you for
thank
being
you.
a patriot, Ben.
Yep.
I appreciate you on the House floor, what you do for us. It was just always so much fun to see Ben Koppleman's light come on, because you knew it was going to be fun. It was going to be fast and polite. You always were polite. And I appreciate you, Ben.
No problem. Maybe we can do this again sometime as the session unfolds a little later on. So thanks a lot,
We
guys.
will.
Appreciate
Definitely. Thank you,
You
Ben.
have a good night, Ben. God
You
bless.
too.
God bless.
That is one of the patriots right there. Right
Yep.
there.
I
What an
believe
honor.
it.
What an honor. And for him to be on this show is so gutsy because of the hatred that some legislators have against me is saying so much. And him being
Yep.
from Fargo, he is putting a huge target on his back for
Yep.
being on this show. And I can't believe, I was going to say this to him too, Shiloh. I can't believe what him with those bills, those Fargo bills, is putting a huge target on him, a huge target on him. I can't believe he's doing it. I think he's suicidal in the legislature. My hat is off.
Well, there comes a time when you have to stand up for what's right. And that's,
That's where he's
we all
at.
could take a page from him on that. Say before we go, Luke, I just want to throw this out there. Sponsorships here for the show. We definitely could use some sponsorships to help us with getting some more equipment and different things and bettering the show. If you guys want any information on that, you can email us here at our email at here's the deal podcast1@gmail.com, and we can get you that information. We're going to have some ads and different things that we're going to do as we move on with the show and grow the show. So,
Well, just
other
as
than that,
great, I'm glad you brought this up, Shiloh. Just as a side note, folks, $50 on this show will get you a lot of advertising once a week. So when we're experimenting with a lot of different things, this is all under Shiloh's hat, and eventually we'll probably do live commercials, videos, and I mean for $50, we will put your business card, a calling card, on this show live right then and there, and you will see it for quite an often, once a week.
it'll go on the YouTube page. It'll go on our Facebook page as well. And we're working on doing a website, so it'll go on there as well. So yes, if you guys are interested in sponsoring the show, please reach out to us either at our email here at here's the deal podcast1@gmail.com, or you can get a hold of us on any of our Facebook pages. It'd be greatly appreciated. So with that, I think that's a wrap. It was a great show. Nice to see you again, Brother Luke.
Good to see
So
you, my friend. Good trip in South Dakota too, by the way. Wasn't that fun?
yes, man, we did have fun. We sure did.
He got sick
It
of me,
seemed
peoples. He got sick really quick.
I've got I've got I've got patience. Let's just put it that way. So
Well, patience. I don't want to hear about patience. If there's that much snow on the ground, old Grandpa over there, Grandpa Smurf,
well, if
he's
someone wouldn't
not
have
going 80.
loaded the
I know
van
that.
with 4 rolls of barbed wire, I mean, we could have
Oh,
probably did a little bit better. But
you'd had a Ford that wouldn't even known that was there.
you know what? I don't want to hear anything about my driving. You're the guy who put your car on top of a
Hey, we
snowbank,
got to
all
go.
right?
Look at the time.
So
Look at the time. It's already.
yeah, exactly. So
Love
all
you
right,
all.
folks. Yep.
Good
See you
night.
next week.
Good night.